Chapter 21, Section 1 continued. By the time you get to the winter of 1914-1915, that first winter, countries were starting to prepare for a long war. The idea that they'd be home by Christmas was gone. And you're going to start seeing the development of trench warfare. You're going to have trenches dug into northeastern France for hundreds of miles as people started looking for ways to escape the gunfire. And between the two sides, you're going to have this area known as No Man's Land. No Man's Land was a wasteland of barbed wire, mud, torn earth, shattered trees. And to attack, a soldier actually had to climb up and race across No Man's Land. Typically, before they did that, artillery from behind would fire over you into the enemy's trenches, trying to soften them up. And then you would charge across No Man's Land, typically facing machine gun fire. This is what it looked like in your typical trench. You got your duck boards that you're walking across to stay out of the mud and water, firing stuff you can step up on, and shoot across No Man's Land at the other side. There are going to be numerous hazards in these trenches. Everything's from rats to lice to disease. Actually, in World War I, disease killed more people than battle. You've got the unburied dead. There was no time to bury them. You've got the dysentery people would get from this impure water that they had to drink. And then the fourth trench hazard is going to be something called trench foot. This was not something that just a couple soldiers got. That first winter, the British treated 20,000 of their soldiers for this. But you had these continually cold, wet feet with no chance to dry out, no way to get dry socks, dry boots, and you just got that rubbing in your boot, and you ended up with what was known as trench foot. This is obviously an extreme case of trench foot. Let's take some time now to talk about the new weapons that are going to influence this war, that are going to make this war even deadlier. The first one we're going to mention was the machine guns. These were not the machine guns that were handheld as we know today. These were manned on a flat surface by about a 4 to 6 man crew, could fire about 400 rounds per minute. Obviously going to be extremely deadly as people tried to cross No Man's Land. You've got long-range artillery, not just artillery. Artillery's been around for centuries. But long-range artillery, these were big guns, firing big shells. You could fire from behind your lines, over your trenches, over the enemy's, in No Man's Land, into the enemy's trenches. Some rounds could travel for miles. By the end of the war, the Germans could fire on Paris from 76 miles away. Some of these rounds would weigh around half a ton, 1,000 pounds. Tanks. Tanks are going to be first introduced at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Looking at the design of these tanks, initially made to cross No Man's Land, a way to try to cross No Man's Land. And in the beginning, they were not very successful. But as time went on, they worked on perfecting these to eventually look at the tanks we have today. Airplanes. In the beginning, airplanes were used primarily for observation. See where the enemy was going, see what they were doing, see where you need to move your troops. But then eventually pilots began to carry weapons. Story goes that began with one pilot in the air throwing a brick at another pilot in the air, and eventually evolves into mounted machine guns and everything. Overall, airplanes had very little influence on the outcome of this war. One of the most famous Germans in this war is going to be Manfred von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron. He was known for his 80 kills. He also becomes famous in the Charlie Brown series because Snoopy was always going after the Red Baron. The most famous American ace was Eddie Rickenbacker. Eddie Rickenbacker is going to earn 26 kills. In his defense, we were not in the war as long as the Germans, so he didn't have his chance to get as many as the Red Baron did. Poison gas. This is going to be the most feared of the new weapons. Poison gas is going to be first used by the Germans at Ypres in 1915. You could release it in a mist. You could put it in a shell and send it over to the other side. But you literally had seconds to get your gas mask on. Or you could have scarred lungs. It could blind you, all depending on what kind of gas was being used. Two of the more common gases you saw in World War I was chlorine gas, which depended a lot on the weather for its use, and mustard gas, which was a very painful way to die. Sometimes could take up to 5 weeks to die from the mustard gas as it attacked anywhere on your body where there was moisture. Submarines. With submarines, the scary thing was there was little or no warning of an attack. The Germans are going to be famous for their Unterseeboots, or more commonly known as U-boats. So a variety of new weapons are going to make this war even deadlier. So let's get back to the war here. Both sides were experiencing tremendous losses, yet very little territory was exchanging hands. Neither side could advance more than a few miles. February 1916, the Germans are going to begin an offensive at Verdun, France. They hope to cause such unsustainable casualties to the Allies that they'd be able to break through and the Allies wouldn't be able to continue on fighting. They're going to begin this fight with a 21-hour artillery barrage. They fired more than 1 million shells at the Allies. And then 1 million Germans are going to attack what was 200,000 French there. This battle is going to go on for 5 months, yet very little territory is going to be exchanged. As both sides sends in more troops, you end up having 700,000 French and Germans killed. This is going to be the longest battle of the war, and over 1 million casualties. July 1916, you're going to have the Battle of the Somme. The Allies this time, they want to launch such a big attack they can exhaust the German reserves. Cause so much damage that the Germans can't spare any more troops to send there. It's going to be horrific. The British, in one day, suffered 60,000 casualties. We need to talk now about the Eastern Front. All the fighting we've been talking about so far has been on the Western Front. Let's talk about what's going on that Eastern Front. In the beginning, Russia does have some early success. Remember, the Germans were preoccupied in France. They thought the Russians were going to be slow. They weren't. So the Russians early on do have some success. But in the spring of 1915, Austro-Hungary German offensive is going to cause the Russians to retreat. By the time you get to late 1916, the Russian war effort is all but over. The Russians were poorly trained, poorly equipped, and poorly led. You're talking just in the year 1915 alone, there were more than 2 million Russians killed, captured, or wounded. Plus, when you look at the geography, Russia can't get supplies. You can't send it by land because between Germany and Austria-Hungary, they block the whole thing. The German ports, the Germans are going to block Russia's ports in the Baltic Sea area. They're going to choke that off with the U-boats. And then the Ottoman Empire down there, they're going to block the entrance from the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. The Russians can't get supplies. This is a world war. It wasn't just in Russia. It wasn't just on the Western Front in France. It wasn't just in Germany. This war is going to affect other parts of the world as well. In Africa, there were German colonies, and the Allies are going to seize German colonies in Africa. In Asia, Japan's going to take German colonies. Australia, and New Zealand, okay, part of the British Empire, are going to take German colonies. So this truly was a world war.